Welcome back to another Word on Fire show. I'm the host, Brandon Vaught, and joining us is Bishop Robert Barron. Bishop Barron, welcome.
Hey, Brandon. Good morning. How you doing?
I'm doing wonderful. Now, you recently had a prestigious guest come to your Santa Barbara residence, Cardinal William Levada. Tell us about him.
Yeah, well, he's a good man. He's the former, of course, Archbishop of Portland, former Archbishop of San Francisco, and then after that, he was the head of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. So he was Joseph Ratzinger's successor in that key job in the Roman Curia. And he's, of course, from L.A. He's an L.A. priest. And so when I came out here as an auxiliary bishop, he was very kind to me. And in fact, he sent me a book on California. He was trying to just get me acquainted with this area. And another interesting thing is when he was auxiliary of L.A., which he was for a short time, he was in charge of my region. He was in charge of the Santa Barbara region out here.
Did he live at the same residence, or is that different now?
Did not. However, he designed it. This used to be, where I live now, used to be a convent. And then the nuns left, and so it was determined their convent would be turned into the office and residence for the regional bishop. So he was given the task of supervising that renovation, which he did. And then before it was finished, he was transferred to Portland. So he never lived here, but I live in the house basically that he designed. Anyway, he came, we had a lovely visit, we had mass together and then lunch, and we talked about just a lot of different things. I mean, he was the chief doctrinal officer of the Catholic Church for, 7 years maybe? So we talked about books, what I was reading, we talked about evangelization. He was very interested in apologetics and what we're doing in that area now. We talked about confirmation, about high school kids and what's blocking them and all this business. So it was a very interesting visit. He's 81 now, I believe, Cardinal Levada, but still very lively fellow. And then off he went up to San Francisco. He was on his way back there after he saw me.
So that means he's past the voting age now for the conclave?
He is. Yeah, he was in for example, the Congregation for Bishops up until he was 80. And then he, at 80, you step down from all those responsibilities. So, yeah. But, he's still one of these people that's so connected and so involved and knows so many people that he's still a player, I would say, in the life of the church.
Well, another thing I wanted to get your thoughts on, we're recording this just less than 24 hours after the great eclipse. Did you guys get to see that out there in California?
Well, actually, I think it was about 60% here in LA, you could see. I was giving a talk yesterday to a group of our elementary school teachers. So right in the middle of the talk, there were windows all behind me, and people were kind of noticing it was getting a little darker, So I must say I didn't see it. But I understand you did, you and your kids, huh?
We did, yeah. We drove all the way up from Florida to South Carolina to get into Path of Totality, which is probably also a good band name.
But, it is, yeah.
Yeah, we got to see it. It was amazing.
Yeah, and you were saying how it really got, discernibly darker, huh?
Yeah, it did, and cooler. You could feel the temperature drop. It was dark. It reminded me of like a really bad rainstorm, but without the sense that it's about to rain. It just was dark and cool. So it was really, really neat experience.
Well, great memories for your kids, huh?
Absolutely. Hey, well, listen, for this episode, we're going to talk about beauty and the Catholic tradition, and we're going to base it on a talk that you recently gave at the C3 conference, it's kind of a technology conference out there in Los Angeles. But really, you've been speaking about beauty for most of your quote-unquote professional career, haven't you? Beauty has been a touchstone for you.
It has been, because I think it's one of the great ways into the truth of the faith. I learned the transcendentals, the good, the true, and the beautiful, probably when I was, 18 or 19. And I've always been struck by the kind of interpenetration of the three transcendentals, that if you really have the truth, well, the truth is beautiful and the truth is good. If you really encounter the good, you found ipso facto something true and beautiful. And therefore, if you come across the truly beautiful, you've been led, whether you know it or not, to the true and the good. And so I just find it's an especially winsome way today in our culture to get toward the truth of the faith.
I want to dig a little deeper into that. You've described beauty as perhaps the privileged route of evangelization. Talk a little bit more about why you think that is.
Yeah, it's because of our culture now, our postmodern culture, which has been so influenced by, in my judgment, Nietzsche, Sartre, voluntarism, I think are all marks of our time, namely that the will trumps the truth. What I decide is the case in regard to the world or to God or to me. Well, see, in that environment, an appeal to the true is almost automatically resisted. Because people say, well, what do you mean, the true? I mean, you're going to impose your view on me? And then I say even more, if you appeal to the good, when you say, well, this is the good life that you ought to be living, man, do people react against that. No one wants to be told that what they're doing is bad, right? So the true and the good, especially today, raise hackles. I think the beautiful is more, as I say, winsome because it's less threatening immediately to people. It's not telling you, now, mind you, yet, because we'll get there. Or I'm not bracketing the truth for a second, but it's not telling you directly, here's what you ought to believe. Nor is it saying automatically, here's how you ought to behave. It's just saying, look at this splendid thing or splendid work of art or splendid life. And then it'll draw you. That's my wager, because I believe in the mutual implication of the transcendentals. It'll lead you to the true and the good. But I think it's a better way in today.
You see that phrase via pulchritudinis, the way of beauty, pop up in a lot of Vatican documents. A lot of popes have used it. I think it's one of the most underappreciated undercurrents of Vatican teaching, because Pope Benedict regularly commended it. So did John Paul II. Would you say that it maybe today it's starting to get more traction, that people are starting to recognize, we need to pursue that path?
Yeah, look in Evangelii Gaudium. Pope Francis, in my judgment, the greatest of his writings so far in his papacy. He highlights it. He highlights it by name, the Via Pulchritudinis, as an evangelical path. And I think it's because people are intuiting what I just talked about. We have a hard time getting traction right away with truth and goodness. But the beautiful, I think I don't want to use the word lure, because it sounds kind of like I'm being,
manipulative
and all that. I don't mean in that way, but I think it draws someone to the truth in a less aggressive way, and that's why it's attractive. And also, we are a beautiful religion. It's one of the marks of Catholicism. We've resisted at our best the iconoclastic tendency, and that's very old problem within Christianity. Go way back to the early centuries. People would say, look, you can't use images and pictures and statues because, no graven images, and it's a distraction, it's a danger of idolatry, etc. And the church at its best, beginning with people like John of Damascus, resisted that temptation. And they said, no, we can and should use the beautiful. And the basic argument there, Brandon, as you well know, is the incarnation. Because Paul refers to Jesus as the icon, right? The icon of the invisible God. Well, if that's true of him, then all the other beautiful things and pictures and objects participate in that iconic quality, and they can draw people to the Lord.
When I think of beauty, I often think of St. Augustine's line about time when he says, of course I know what time is until somebody asks me to define it. And I think beauty's the same way with me. If someone said, what is beauty? I'm not sure I'd know what to say. So how would you answer that question? What is beauty?
Well, I think first I'll speak to your observation there. I think it's an important one that, the deepest questions in life are always the most difficult. That's why people who are really into scientism, that science is the only way to know, and they'll just mock philosophy as, this old primitive, science. No, on the contrary. I've argued the reason philosophy can seem obscure sometimes is not that it's primitive science, but that they're such difficult and advanced questions. They can't be adjudicated in the relatively straightforward way that you can adjudicate a scientific question by empirical observation, measurement, experimentation. Things like, what is the beautiful? What is time? What is moral value? I don't know, man. I think those are far more difficult, far more complex, intellectually challenging sort of questions. So that's one reason why the beautiful can appear like, well, I don't know, what is that? I can't even define it, so I guess it's just up to the individual. I would say no. I stand in the great Thomistic tradition. The beautiful is as objective as the true and the good. Just as I shouldn't say, even though people say it today, I shouldn't say, that's my truth but not yours, true for you but not for me. And that's silly. You can't really mean that if you know a truth what that word signifies. Just as you can't say, oh, that's good for you, but not good for me. People do say that, but it's stupid. If you really know what the good is, you can't be relativistic in that way. In the very same way, it seems to me, you can't say, well, sure, that's beautiful as far as I'm concerned, but, not for you, and who am I to impose my view of beauty on you? No, the beautiful is just as objective as the good and the true. Thomas says it occurs at the intersection of three things: integritas, consonantia, and claritas. His Latin for, I would render them, wholeness, harmony, and radiance. And when those three things come together, Aquinas opined, we say, that's beautiful. But we're not just projecting something, we're noticing something. That's the point.
Can you walk us through each of those three things that intersect to make something beautiful? Maybe give us a concrete example and show how each of those are displayed.
I'll tell you what, because it's on my mind on Thursdays, so a couple days from now. I'm playing golf with one of the pastors out here in Montecito. We're playing on this famous golf course I've never played before. So anyway, I'm kind of thinking about my golf swing because I don't want to. And also playing with us that day is Archbishop Gomez. So I want to be able, at least as well as I can, right, to play golf.
You want to beat Archbishop Gomez is what you're getting at.
No. I don't want to beat him. No, I just want to impress him, that I roughly know how to swing a golf club. So look at a golf swing. Think of, not me, a bad golfer, but think of a great golfer. The swing has integritas. It's about one thing. Do you know how? Maybe use an example of like a bad golfer. Is that the swing is kind of all over the place? That you say, what's he doing there? I mean, it begins one way, but then gets off plane. He's trying to correct that as he does other funny thing with his body, and it's not about one thing. It looks like it's at odds with itself, right? It lacks integritas. But when a great golfer, think of Tiger in his prime, or Jack Nicklaus, or Rory McIlroy, you say, wow, that's like a machine that's just functioning properly. It's about one thing. Now, that's integritas. Relatedly, consonantia, what's that? Well, sonare, cum sonare, means to sound with. It's harmony, same idea, right? Like a choir, like instruments that are playing together in harmony, not at odds with each other, but they're different, yet they're about, one purpose. So think of a golf swing now, all the elements of it, the takeaway, the hinging of the wrists, the turn of the shoulders, the movement of the hips so as to get you on plane. Now the coming down from the top of your swing, on plane through the hitting area, getting your hands ahead of the ball so you create this leverage that will launch the ball. Then the follow through with straight arms all the way. Don't chicken wing as I do, which means that you're losing a lot of your power and so on. Now what I'm describing are all the elements that make up a golf swing, right? All the parts of it. In a beautiful golf swing, they have consonantia. They sing together, one influencing the other. Like golfers know what I'm talking about. They'll talk about like a death move. That means you've made some move in your golf swing that, man, you can't recover from that. Like if you make that move, then you'll never hit the ball well because you can't recover from that. So consonantia means all the elements of it come together. Then the last one, claritas. It means radiance, right? When Rory McIlroy swings and you go, wow, that's a golf swing. Yeah, that's it, man. That's claritas. What you're noticing is the radiance of the form. That's the way Jacques Maritain put it. The form, what makes a golf swing appears. When I swing, people say, yeah, I guess it's kind of in the ballpark of a golf swing, or yeah, it kind of looks like, but it's more like a hockey swing or something. It's what it's lacking is claritas. It doesn't have that radiance. I've often made this connection between the claritas of whatever, a golf swing or a beautiful face or a beautiful gesture with the halo around a saint's head. So why do we use that symbol of a halo? Not that, although some people claim they can physically see them sometimes, but I think what it means is it's the symbolism evocative of the radiance that's coming off of the integral and consonant life of the saint, right? So take golf swing. Now, the life of a saint. As Kierkegaard said, a saint is someone whose life is about one thing. I've always loved that definition, right? It doesn't mean that it's a boring life or monotonous, but it just means everything is gathered. Everything is about one thing. So that all the elements of the saint's life, think of public life, private life, all their endeavors, their missions, their friendships, everything, come together contributing to that one goal. When that happens, people say, look, that's a human life. That's what we're meant to be like, right? Integritas, consonantia, claritas. Whenever we see those three things coming together, we tend to say, that's beautiful.
So if beauty is objective and it's the intersection of these three qualities, then let me ask you about something that I've always wrestled with. Suppose that you have something that I think you, Bishop, would definitely describe as objectively beautiful. I'm thinking here of the Sistine Chapel or, Chartres Cathedral, something like that. Yeah. But we know, I mean, it's demonstrably true that there are people who will stand under the Sistine Chapel and just kind of say, it's okay. It's not, I wouldn't describe it as beautiful. What's going on there? How would you explain that?
Well, I would explain it. Take the other two transcendentals. I mean, if you're showing a high level mathematician some elegantly contrived equation, and it's all, written out and beautifully, harmoniously presented on the page, that high-level mathematician will recognize its beauty and say, what's the term they often use is elegance.
Elegance,
right? Elegant proof. It's an elegant demonstration. Sure, he'll get it, but show a beginner in mathematics, and I don't know, I don't get it. Well, we don't think that's puzzling, do we? So in a similar way, an eye that's properly trained, a mind that's properly trained to appreciate the beautiful is going to get it in a way that a beginner isn't. So see, our tendency is to say, oh, therefore, I guess it's all subjective, or, oh, I guess you don't get it, rather than to say, let me show you. Let me show you why that's beautiful. We shouldn't give up so soon.
So how do we cultivate that sense in ourselves or help other people cultivate the sense of the beautiful?
Well, take the three elements, and take something like the Sistine Chapel ceiling as a good example, because one of the many splendid elements there is the integritas of it, the architectural design of that ceiling. As Michelangelo arranges the figures around the sort of architectural structure, and to show how that thing has incredible integritas. Despite the extraordinary complexity of it, think of all the hundreds of figures and designs and movements and so on, and yet you can show, look, this thing is about one thing. Secondly, show them, for example, the three different levels of the Sistine Chapel ceiling, the three elements he's dealing with, whether it's the Sibyls and prophets, and then you have those angels, then you have the scenes from the book of Genesis. Show how the ancestors of Christ are related to the Sibyls and prophets and so on. Show how all of it relates to the central image in the ceiling. The consonantia, in other words, of that ceiling, despite its enormous complexity, is staggering. How it hangs together, how the elements influence each other. It's like the other night one of my favorite pieces of music is the Beethoven Ninth, and everyone knows the fourth movement with the great Ode to Joy. But a splendid thing to notice about that is how the earlier movements they anticipate the fourth movement. Kenneth Clark referred to premonitory rumblings within the Ninth Symphony, like these little anticipations of what's to come. Well, what you're noticing there is the consonantia of this magnificent piece of music. So, in other words, I think there are objective qualities you can appeal to if someone doesn't get it. Okay, I don't get it. It doesn't mean it's not to be gotten. It means you got to learn how to open your eyes and see.
One motif that pops up in a lot of your writings are examples of people who have been transformed by beauty. I'm thinking here of people like Dante, James Joyce's Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, Sebastian in Brideshead Revisited. Talk about maybe one or two of these people, whether literary or real, who are transformed by beauty.
Go back to A Portrait of the Artist of James Joyce. I mean, arguably the greatest novelist of the 20th century. The character in that story, Stephen Dedalus, is an alter ego for Joyce himself. And Joyce, as a young man, it seems clear, thought for a time of becoming a priest, a Jesuit priest. He was trained by the Jesuits. He learned his scholasticism. Everything, in fact, I've been talking about, I first came across those terms when I was in college and read A Portrait of the Artist. There's a famous scene where Stephen is explaining to his friend the nature of integritas, consonantia, and claritas. That's the first time I ever heard of it, was from James Joyce. So the young Joyce thinking about the priesthood, but then decides that's not his path. And then this famous scene where he's walking on the beach. Now, it did happen, it seems clear. Now, he does it in a very stylized way in the book, but he reports seeing this woman who eventually became his wife, Nora Barnacle. And he sees her, of course, that name evocative enough of the sea, Nora Barnacle. And she's out in the strand, out in the sea. And he describes her form and her figure. And what he's doing is he's looking at the consonantia of the elements that make her up, And then she turns to him and, as it were, allows him to see her, to contemplate her. Well, there's a comparison here with the Blessed Mother, where she's an object of contemplation. And then famously, she turns out to look to the open sea. And that's where Joyce, who is well aware of the great classical literary and philosophical tradition, is consciously evoking the Diotima speech in the Symposium of Plato, where Diotima speaks to all the men around the table there about beginning with the particular beautiful, going to ever higher stages of beauty, and then finally looking out, she says, to the open sea of the beautiful itself. So Joyce is conveying to us how he got his vocation. It wasn't to be a Jesuit, but it was to be, as he put it later, a reporter of epiphanies, that he would report those moments of such beauty that they cause you to look out into the open sea of the beautiful itself. He became a priest of the beautiful, if you want. Now, do I wish James Joyce had stayed fully a member of the Roman Catholic Church? Sure. And he didn't. And it's a complicated story. But I think something of it remained in this vocational discernment. And indeed, that's the vocation that James Joyce followed the rest of his life. He would be a reporter of epiphanies. But I think he was obsessed with the question of God and of leading people to the open sea of the beautiful itself. So that's a really fine example of what you're talking about.
Another literary figure who was similarly converted by beauty was the French poet Paul Claudel. Tell us about his story and his encounter at Notre Dame Cathedral. Yeah,
what I find so moving about that is Claudel was converted, awakened, you might say, reawakened to his Catholic faith, precisely at Notre Dame. The rose window, but also that statue of the Blessed Mother, which I knew well from the 14th century, and it's there in the sanctuary. And I know exactly what he's talking about because I experienced that when I first walked into that great place. I was there just a few weeks ago when we were filming in Paris. But I first walked in there and saw that rose window and was so mesmerized by it. And of course, the rose window, get a picture, our listeners, go online and look up North Rose Window. You want to see integritas, consonantia, and claritas? Right when Thomas Aquinas was writing about the beautiful, that window was being built. And so you see it there par excellence, But Claudel was reawakened in his faith, not by argument so much, but by beauty, by the beauty of that place. It sang to him. And another descendant of his spiritually was Cardinal Lustiger of Paris, who, young Jewish kid, his parents, his mother is sent off to Auschwitz. He's being protected by a Catholic family in France. And one day this Jewish kid wanders into, it wasn't Notre Dame, but another one of the great cathedrals. And that had the galvanizing effect on him. So I get it. That's the route of the beautiful.
Let's wrap up here with one maybe more personal question. What's been one of the most profound encounters that you've had with beauty in your own life?
Well, I just referred to it there, was that experience of the North Rose Window on June the 12th, 1989, my first day in Paris. I remember it like it was yesterday, and I was jet lagged. I was confused. I felt lost. I just arrived in this new country. Mind you, this is before cell phones and everything else. And all I had was the address of the house I was to live in my wallet. So I found that house, put my bag down, and walked down to the Notre Dame. and saw that window. And it was so powerful that it's literally true that every single day from that day until I went home around Christmas time, I went down to look at that window. So that was one of the most extraordinary. I would say, too, as a young man, I remember reading Irving Stone's great Agony and the Ecstasy, about Michelangelo when I was about 15 or 16. And that awakened me to Michelangelo. And then I've done a kind of a lifelong study of Michelangelo. The first time I saw the Sistine Chapel, it had that kind of impact on me. So those are a couple, but it's been a very powerful route for me.
Well, it's time now for one of our questions from our listeners. Today we get to hear from Francisco from the land of Pope Francis, Argentina. So here's Francisco's question.
Hello, Bishop Barron. I'm Francisco, and I'm from Argentina. And I was listening to your podcast on the LA Religion Conference, and I wanted to ask you, what do you think is the role of the humanities in the new evangelization, especially literature?
Yeah, good. Thank you for that. And it's right on our topic for today. In my books over the years, I've used the literary a lot. So I've used William Faulkner, I've used Flannery O'Connor, I've used Dante, of course. And I've taken very seriously the literary beautiful as a way into the sacred. See, I think one of the marks of our time, as I said, is a suspicion of the truth, especially religious truth. So in a way, you have to kind of draw people more indirectly into it. I like the old Jesuit principle, is I'll go in your door, but you're going to come out my door. In other words, I'll find the door that you are intrigued by, or I'll find the path that you find interesting, and I'll go in there with you. But you're going to come out through my door. In other words, I'm going to show you that this thing will lead you to God. And so I think for a lot of people today, this aesthetic approach is a very important pre-evangelistic approach. In the time of Thomas Aquinas, it was certainly a philosophy, I'd say. And for a long time, that was the great pre-evangelistic approach. Today, I still believe it, but so much of philosophy today is sort of nihilistic and just relativistic and deconstructionist and all this. So it's almost like a non-starter for a lot of people, philosophy. So I've intuited that this aesthetic and indeed literary, artistic approach might be a better way, an easier way in.
Well, thanks so much for that great question, Francisco. If you have a question for Bishop Barron, be sure to visit askbishopbarron.com, record your question, and send it in to us. Well, thanks to all of you for listening to this episode of the Word on Fire Show. One last reminder about a special coupon code we have for you. It's for Bishop Barron's new film series, David the King, which is coming out here in just a couple weeks. But you can get $10 off that series when you visit davidtheking.com and use the coupon code DAVID. Again, davidtheking.com, use the coupon code DAVID, and you'll save $10 on the David the King DVD or Blu-ray. Well, thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next week on the Word on Fire Show.